Greetings, fellow travellers, and welcome to the Way of the Showman, where we view the world through the lens of showmanship. I am Captain Frodo, and I will be your gracious host and guide along the way. And a little bit of housekeeping. It's just been tremendous to see the response that's been happening over this last bit of time. The Buy Me a Coffee is working. My friend Pedro and Chiara, thank you so much for actually having used it. I'm recording this a little bit in the future because I'm going to go doing some circus shows. So there might be more of you that has been using it, but thanks to all the additional ones, and thanks for the interest. Some new projects have come. Some of you have reached out to me, and we've started to work together on some new acts and shows, so that's also very exciting. Now, last time we spoke about the life and the living, and I went on a little bit of a ramble in the beginning, off script and whatever, about what we need in life and how most people thrive best in a stable life situation with friends around them. We all seek fulfillment of emotional, social and intellectual needs in an environment where the pursuits of these goals are permitted and even encouraged. Wrote that thing, and it's complex and all that, but we spoke about what that meant last time, that we just basically need to find our scene. Not everybody is born in the place where they will turn out to belong. The world's a complicated place, and there's many, many places, and there's many, many people out there. Your tribe might just be somewhere else. You might be the chief or ruler of some domain, some other place. Well, not mean that you're going to rule it, but you're going to be ruling it like, you rule, man, like that. But anyway, to start like that, I sort of turned in, as we went after talking about that, into how the signpost that we have with two different signs, one pointing towards show and one pointing towards man. But before we get there, I sort of gone that I talked a little bit about how our sort of that when we reflect on things, that we discover that being fulfilled emotionally and socially and intellectually is a changing target. That it's easy to say this is what we need, but exactly where we're going to end up along that scale, we just don't quite know, because we human beings are, I would say, per definition, not static entities. We're just fluid, and we're always in change. Anything that is alive is changing. That's part of what being alive is. We are a system, as far as I remember from having read in some book somewhere, that we are a system outside of equilibrium. It means food and food is going into us, being turned into energy so that we can act and live. I get the closest, like a mineral is maybe not, is much more static and is more towards an equilibrium, even though in there too there might be some atomic decay, but I'm drifting. What's important is to know that the way that you are now, or what's important to you now, was probably not the same stuff that was important to you at 14 or at 28. It's almost like two different people, at who you are at 7 and who you are at 14 and who you are at 28. Just take a second to think about that. Who were you and what was important to you at 14 and 28 or 37 for that matter? The environment which offers you fulfillment at 7 is not the same environment that you need at 28. So our sort of happy place it's important to remember that this is a kind of dynamic state, not a final destination. What's relevant to us at one point is not going to be relevant at another time, because our needs changes, and it requires us to have a dynamic and open approach to both to ourselves and to the world. And we're going to explore that a little bit more today as we go on, but felt this was sort of the main comment I wanted to make on what we talked about last time, that not only are we changing, but the world is also changing. So a place that once offered us solace and comfort might lose these qualities and like force us to move on. Yet if you return to that place years later, you might find that place you've arrived once again it meets your needs. And I think I'm thinking of this because I moved away from the place where I grew up in Norway as soon as I finished school. And from then on, and for a quarter of a century, 25 years, this place was not right for me. And then eventually maybe not right for my family. I thought I was chasing the shows around the world, living my life by a show plan, as a song I wrote says. But then the COVID-19 pandemic hit in March 2020, and I, through a sequence of unfortunate events, ended up having to return home, which turned out not to be an unfortunate event, because this time with my wife and my daughter, and in the altered world situation, coming back to my childhood hometown was a bit of a revelation, because once again this place fitted all my relevant needs, like, in my emotional and social, being with my family, and the intellectual needs were now met through talking to people such as yourself and working with people, collaborating via the interweb. The interweb is the one that you're listening to me on now. That also is the one that has the email. So very big thing. I think it's going to catch on. But anyway, it's not to say that these needs that I have now couldn't be met in other places, but now they could be met where some time ago they couldn't be met. All of this is to say that our needs of the world and our more sort of internal needs from and in ourselves are malleable things. And to navigate this changing and multifaceted reality, we need signposts and maps that are dynamic. And to me, that means that the one and same signpost in our specific, this word that we spoke a bit about, I've spoken a lot about, the word showman, that it has many different arrows attached to the same signpost. And we looked at that last time in depth. We also talked about needing to become independent, which of course we do, and with that we talked a little bit about money, but we also, and money as tokens of energy, but there's of course more to it than money. There might be easier ways to make money than doing this kind of art, or at least more secure, because stability and excitement are almost two sort of flip sides of the same coin. If we're really satiated and all our needs are taken care of in one spot, then we might just be, it might lose, the life might lose some of its excitement. So there's this balance there as well. But if we have an occupation, or as we talked about it, a calling or a vocation, something which is fully igniting our passions and firing up our enthusiasm, that makes us feel like we are alive and all surfing a wave of creativity into the future, then we will be happy many different places. We talked a little bit about the pull of the stage in a kind of cosmic way, of it being like a black hole or whatever, sucking myself into it. And this whole thing, yet again, is one little battle cry, or a speaking out against all the people who say, oh, we're just entertainers, or it is just entertainment what we do. But I think that what we do has the potential to be something much more. Hence this podcast, and as I ended the last time, the way of the showman is a way of life, and a very good life indeed. I am aiming to try to share not just what I think, but how I come to think that way. It might not be your way, but by thinking about some of these things and putting some of these perspectives into your thinking, maybe you can find some gain from it. All right, that's the wrap-up from last week, so let's move on along the way. Inner and outer exploration. If we can agree that the distinction between the outer and the inner geographies is a fruitful or valuable way of thinking, then one of the cool things that happens is that we find ourselves with two entire domains or spaces or geographies open for exploration. This way of thinking helps me grasp my creative projects. It helps me frame questions and how does what I'm thinking about relate to the inner, aspects of the world and my inside, also how does it also relate to the audience's inside, because the audience facing me as I'm about to do the show also has an internal dialogue going on. They have things going on. How does it relate to what's going on inside them? And also, like, how does what I do relate to what's going on in the world, what's going on in this room, what's going on between me and the audience, and my expression of it, and its place in the world. It's many different aspects, and these questions, they just sort of naturally arise if we have these two perspectives in mind. So from there, with all of those questions just multiply, and I find questions to be very fruitful in any creative project. It's like problematizing and asking questions, and asking similar questions to the same topics, whatever it is we're exploring, really can pull you along. Because even whenever there is two, like having the inner and the outer, there is always really three. There is the one, and then it's the other, and then there's also the synthesis, the place of interest, the meeting of the two. So what we, in 2 episodes ago, called the frontier of authenticity is this kind of place, just like the meeting of the performer and the showman, the kind of show that comes in that meeting. That's, the fruits of conversation. Anyway, when I throw myself into a creative process, or when I'm trying to grasp some kind of big idea, I find it really helpful to be able to pass it up and break it apart in meaningful ways. This makes the challenge more manageable. And if it's too big, or it's too hard to get your mouth around the idea and chew it, and this of course makes it hard to digest, and by looking at the idea and seeing what things I am doing to manifest it in the world, I am approaching it in an outer manner. Then I'm asking myself how it relates to my current inner geography, and also how my outer expressions affects the inner geography of my imaginary audience. I have begun the digestive process of making the ideas energy, the energy of the ideas be taken up in me and fueling me. I do believe there is great value in finding the right constraint to help channel the work, and keeping the two geographies in mind is such a constraint for me. It's both a constraint and an opening up. I think of them as constraints, and by constraints I mean tools to shape my creativity. Now, for this folk psychological distinction of inner and outer to be a valuable lens, we don't need to believe that there is some final and complete distinction between the two geographies. It's not really two separate things. It's part of the same thing. We don't have to postulate a complete dualism like Stephen Jay Gould, the famous evolutionary biologist. Like he made this kind of distinction when he proposed that science and religion were what he called non-overlapping magisteria. He believed that there was like an immutable schism between these two domains. Stephen Jay Gould claimed that science and religion was two wholly separate modes of inquiry, which didn't overlap, not in the answers that they sought, or in the kinds of facts they found. In fact, he actually thought that the religious explorations didn't really find facts at all. He believed that what they found, that their discoveries were values. And he maintained that the kinds of things and phenomena that each of them concerned themselves with were qualitatively different. Each threw out a net, so to speak, and the things they were fishing for were not the things fished for by the other. The inner and the outer are not non-overlapping. I don't think so. Rather, the contrary, they are deeply and richly interconnected. And I'm also not convinced that common ground, like a fair ground or midway, that can reconcile some of the translational issues between even Stephen Jay Gould's non-overlapping magisteria. I believe that it's not impossible to find that. And our which is, science and religion. Those are huge topics we can talk about another time, but I think there is some common ground to be found there as well. But our two main domains pointed to by our show man trailhead sign. Picture that, like a pole that's standing. You're out going for a walk along the way. Maybe there's some beautiful fir trees around there, and here and there a few birch trees standing as well. And there, on your right, there is a white pole, and on it is several arrows. It's a trailhead sign, and the show and man, there's written one on each of the different arrows, and one is pointing towards the inner and another is pointing towards the outer, and these are two separate arrows because they can truly be understood as distinct, yet the arrows are on the same word signpost. I don't know if this metaphor is making any sense. So they are distant from each other, yet they are part of the same unity. They're separate, but when we look at them, they are part of a continuum. The diversity we see is still a unity. Their distinctions are only meaningful within the context of a network of relations between the two. Alright, enough about this separation. But when we have two different geographies, it's reasonable to expect that they both can be explored. If these two arrows, one pointing towards the inner and one pointing towards the outer, and those places are places we can actually, in a very real way, get to, then if we can explore them, then maps can be sketched out, and then we can better remember and grasp the different landscapes. And from this it follows that there could be two entirely different kinds of explorations, being distinct enough to warrant being considered different enough to be considered separate, if that makes any sense. I think it's fair to assume that if anything is, thought these two things are separate, then I think it's fair to assume that they would require different approaches to optimize our exploratory navigations. The two domains require different routes and different techniques to best survey their distinct landscapes. If you're going to explore in the tropics, you don't need to bring the same things that you need to explore if you're going to go crossing Greenland with dog sleighs and skis. You pack different things and you behave differently. With all this said, I guess I'm just trying to point out that there is now room for finding ways of exploring both the inner and the outer separately, and learning about each domain separately, and then we can better understand it and understand each as details and distinctions, and thus be able to bring them back together into a whole. So there are two modes of explorations, and making proper and concerted efforts to gain experience and understanding of the two domains and their differences has a clarifying effect and can be very useful in the creative work. Discoveries and realization from each of these geographies influences and stimulates creativity when they are mapped onto discoveries and realizations from the other. One is an exploration of yourself and what's relevant and happening in an internal way. So for this journey, one must in one way or another go inwards into ourselves. And the other is the exploration of the world outside ourselves, and for this we must shake some dust, as Samson, the short-statured dwarf fella, lovely character in the show Carnivale, he would always say, "Come on, children, let's shake some dust." That's what we're going to do in the real world. We've got to get a move on, shake some dust. And the explorations of the outer world concerns both actual travel and learning about the world. It's countries and cultures, about science, about the art and ideas of other artists, and the history of thinking, and of all the amazing things which has happened in the world and the universe. It's enormous and endlessly interesting, always filled. Sometimes we have to push ourselves into things we thought we didn't like, just to break into something new out in the world. Go to a show, or go to a cafe, or go to a shop, or go to a workshop, or go and meet someone. Go and sit down at a table with some people you didn't think you had anything in common with. See what that does to you. Maybe it might open something up, and often, putting in a little bit of effort in that direction might turn out that there is something in there that you can relate to your art. Because the outer geography, as it also includes our performances. Our shows are the expressions of our craft, and they are events which happens in the real world. And every performer naturally engages with this outer world through our practice, practicing our skills and our presentations of our craft and our skills, our shows. In shows, in this way, we are a part of the outer world. And our shows and all the many practical methods and techniques, our skills and every practical aspect of our business are things in the real world. Being a showman, being a performer, putting on shows, traveling, touring, practicing tricks and so forth, and all the stuff we read, and all this is in a very real way a part of exploring and engaging with and being part of the outer geography. Then again, each new skill we learn changes not only our relation to the world but also to ourselves. And this goes equally for learning to balance an umbrella on your elbow as when you read and take in the content of a book. If you take that into you, or you spend some time in a new town, then you are also slightly altered. There we go with this dynamic flow that I spoke about in the introduction. And this process is recursive and reciprocal. It's happening in circles, kind of, and as we shape ourselves in the world is kind of shaping us, and our shows are shaping ourselves, and it's a reciprocal dynamic process, one always stimulating and dynamically influencing the other. And the thing I would like to encourage is about this is kind of simple, but it's to just deliberately set out to explore, to go out with the intent of an explorer. Explore the outer world as with an obsessive quest to find fuel for your internal fire. And we'll get back to this internal fire in detail when we talk about what I call the little candle in a later episode. But going out with the explorer's attitude, to actually be looking at the world when we're going through it, that can be really valuable. And the nature of the showman's craft is often only talked about as something practical, and the deeper esoteric and more philosophical aspects of the craft is not such common topics of discourse and conversation. Hence all this talk about it. But in the next episode we will look a little further into kinds of inner and outer exploration that's been valuable to me. And since showfolk and performers already have a tendency to move about and do the shows, we travel around. It's a tradition, at least going back to the New York showman Joshua Purdy Brown, who revolutionized the circus business in 1825 by presenting his show in a canvas tent in what we today call a big top. That has really changed the way that circuses happened around the world. We travel around in tents now, and that is taken as a given. But that started at a point. Of course, the origin of traveling performers goes way further back than that, to traveling minstrel troops and performers in medieval Europe. And the showman's lot is to travel endlessly from town to town. As the saying goes, the circus comes to town, and it's not usually the other way around. So the point is that most performers travel a whole lot in the outer world. We practice a whole lot in the outer world, but not all of us spend any significant time venturing into our interiors with anything remotely like the persistence we have at our physical practice, and not with as much carefully planned and thought through practice like a meditation, or we work on our characters. If you're a clown, you work on your character, but have we spent much time today or yesterday or any day at working at our own character, the one we play when we go out and pretend that this is real life? I'll be talking about that in the next episode, but since this kind of deep introspective practice is something I came to very late in life, I have been wondering why did it take me so long to start getting into meditation. And I'll look a bit closer at meditation in the next episode, but for now I want to just share a few observations that I have made of myself, not because what I've experienced is anything unique, I guess, but exactly because I think it might not be, you know. I think there is a certain skepticism in a certain subsection of performers to meditation. For those who, like myself, find it a bit, I don't know, kind of suspicious, it might help to hear a few thoughts of a colleague that, like which is me, what I have to say on the subject. And one powerful way of gaining an ordered and systematic way into our interior is meditation. But as it turns out, meditation, for me, I mean, it should be obvious, of course, but I'm writing this as a bit of a, haven't been in my 43 was I at the time, or 44 when I first started doing, so I've only been doing it for 2 years. Anyway, as it turned out, meditation is not just sitting there doing nothing. A lot of people know this, and but a lot of people don't, and I was one of those for years, and I have a strained relationship with anything that wafts of New Age or has got the sort of hippie flavor. And there's a few people listening now, no doubt, that is finding that very funny, because some of the things I've been talking about on this podcast goes against some of the things that I might have been thinking in the past. I think I'm softening up. But anyway, this might sound funny given the peculiar interests, like I have talked about here on the podcast, from tarot to Satanism via circus, academia to sociological and mythical themes, to just straight up personal anecdotes and stories about being a father. I'm into so many things, yet when I get to certain themes, red flags starts waving and alarm bells go off, and I believe a strong reason for this is my magic childhood. There's a certain skepticism that was produced in my magic childhood. And my reluctance to engage in any kind of meditation or contemplative practices, I think it might have stemmed from my upbringing as the son of a magician. Growing up with my father, he subscribed to many magazines. And before the internet, having magazine subscriptions was a real thing one did, and it came in the mail. And he subscribed to several magic magazines. Louis Tannen's Magic Manuscripts and Genie, the Conjurers magazines, were the ones that I remember best. He also subscribed to several science magazines. One, Illustrated Science, he is still subscribing to now, 30 years later. Another magazine, which semi-regularly arrived in our mailbox, was a Norwegian magazine called Skeptisk, which means skeptical. This was the members' magazine for the Norwegian Skeptics Association. It was dedicated to the investigations of extraordinary claims or paranormal things and promoting the teaching of science, rationalism and critical thinking, which is basically what skeptics organizations around the world does. And being the son of a magician, I learned the secrets needed to perform impossible things. I learned that there was an entire craft dedicated to quite literally performing miracles. The things magicians do, like making people or objects levitate, making things move with the power of the mind, finding lost objects like cards picked and then lost in the deck, reading minds, are all very much the kinds of things that gurus, guardmen and Tibetan lamas or whatever were supposed to be able to do. So there is a very strong correlation between what magicians do and what what psychics, fortune tellers and miracle mongers does. What physics forbids, perhaps. Perhaps that was what I meant. That was what I meant. Quite often, there is no difference at all between what a psychic does and what a magician does, even if there might be a huge gap in what the audience perceives as they watch essentially the same stuff. Their modes of presentations are quite different. The psychic makes claims about their presentations which necessitate rewriting the laws of physics, whilst the magician does her psychic experiments within the confines of the natural. An odd phenomenon that some magicians observe is how often the supernatural manifests as magic tricks which are already established parts of many performers' repertoire. Take the phenomenon of spoon bending. Many years ago I had an interesting conversation with my father-in-law and his partner, and soon after meeting them for the very first time the subject of bending spoons with the power of the mind came up. And if I remember correctly, they had seen such a demonstration and at least to a certain extent had become, if not convinced, at least were agnostic as to the veracity of this phenomenon. Was it real? After all, they had seen it with their own eyes. As a magician, I shouldn't divulge any secrets, but since the person they had seen had conceived or convinced them that they might not actually be a magician, but rather an exhibitor of supernatural powers, and since that was the game he had set up, I thought this is fair game. And I said something to them, the in-laws, in something like, isn't it just amazing that the supernatural finds its manifestation through something which already exists as a marketed product? Spoon bending is a skill magicians can learn. For about $30 you can buy a DVD where an expert in the branch of magic, this particular branch of magic, teaches you how to bend spoons. Whole careers have been made by this act alone. Books, magazines, and the internet are full of research, methods, and techniques for achieving the illusion of bending metal with the power of the mind. This is just not so well known, unless you're a magician. Then you might be able to quote a genealogy of performers who have made their careers from performing these tricks or made significant contributions to the art and craft of creating these kinds of illusion. And it is easier to understand what I mean if I change the trick to one which is more well known for non-magicians. If I, for instance, if I told you that the other day when I was out here at what is it called, like a prayer house, this is the Norwegian kind of little chapel or whatever, that I was around in the countryside, and if I told you that I saw there a presentation where a man put a beautiful lady in a sparkly costume into a box and then proceeded to saw her in half, and that he pushed the boxes apart, and that she really was in two pieces with her head sticking out in one end of one of the boxes and her feet stuck out in the other one, and there was a gap between. And get this, when I watched it, this was even more amazing. There was not any blood. He sawed her in half, or cut her with some slicing metal things, and there was no blood. It was a true miracle, rivaling turning water into wine and walking on water. And then, in stark contradiction to what the laws of nature and modern science should make possible, he simply put her back, and with a snap of his fingers, she came out of a trance and came out of the box, and then they did a choreographed dance routine with the miracle worker, the woman did, with the miracle worker, to demonstrate her complete miraculous recovery. If I said something like this in all earnestness, then you would think, no, hang on a minute, that is a magic trick. You're describing a magic trick, and you would not accept or even consider this to be a supernatural feat. It's like you can't, because you know it's a magic trick, like you've seen it, and what I described simply wouldn't fit into the category of miracles like water to wine or whatever the gold standard is for a miracle. The point I'm making is that this is the exact thing that I experience when people say that spoon bending or reading minds. Then when they say this is a supernatural feat, it's just I'm struck again and again by, how often it seems that the real proof that's out there in the world of supernatural events match the skills of what people of our trade, the showmen, the performers, the magicians. It matches what we already do. So perhaps it is us who are the providers of the proofs of much of the supernatural world. And it could, of course, be possible. It totally could, that this one particular miracle worker that I saw performing the chopping of the lady, or that the ones that my father-in-law had seen, maybe that person actually did have some supernatural powers. Just like it could be that the man who cut the lady in half and, restored her, that they indeed did have supernatural powers. Maybe they could perform a genuine miracle, but it was just by some complete fluke, indistinguishable from a well-known, frequently performed magic trick. It is possible, but it is unlikely. And this is probably why there is a long history of magicians being skeptics. Harry Houdini being an early and very famous example. Houdini lived and performed at the height of the spiritism craze, where spirits were contacted in seances and wrote messages on slates and with their spirit hands and played instruments behind curtains and things of that nature. Houdini made it his life's mission to show that these spiritualist performers and mediums were charlatans or magicians just like himself. And he thought himself to be an honest liar, that he was honest about being a deceiver. And of course I think he thought that it would sell tickets, because we do know that people are interested in hearing about the secrets of magic, and if somebody claimed they are a spirit worker, then I guess you're fair game. So he was a shrewd businessman, which is very good for him. We still talk about him now, so I guess he's made it. Anyway, from these magic magazines that came in the mail and the magazines on critical thinking, I learned that there was knowledge that one could get about what so many books called the greatest mysteries of the world. Things like how the pyramids got built, like is there a species of humanoid ape creatures, Bigfoot living in America, Sasquatch, Yeti, are there UFOs, Yeti lives in Tibet I guess, are there UFOs picking up people and taking them on interstellar journeys with probes up their butts? The magic and skeptical literature that was around as I grew up certainly indicated that there was a whole lot to know about these things before one resorted to supernatural or extraordinary explanations. So extraordinary claims requires extraordinary evidence. That was one of the things that it talked about. If somebody says that they can they can bend a spoon, but there is an entire field of magic that deals with how to bend a spoon, perhaps before we start rewriting the books of physics to go, there are certain times when things can move, or bend with the power of the mind. Before we do that, then we should just make sure that we have extraordinary evidence that this is the case. Possibly even some ideas of how or why it would happen. As a rule of thumb, this kind of thing, getting extraordinary evidence before we accept extraordinary claims, that might get us far. And all this stuff about my childhood here now, and how this is stuff that was it was everywhere in my childhood. Being a magician, you think about these things. All this stuff is just to say that I have a very low threshold for calling things bullshit. I love mysteries, and that's why I think I sometimes go, hang on a second, that is not a mystery, that is bullshit. Because I love mysteries, but I love genuine mysteries. And if someone says that, like, what about the mystery of the bent spoons, or any other field that is studied and explored at length by performers, then at some point evolution was a mystery to me, so I studied it, and now it's not so mysterious. It is still splendid and amazing and a truly fascinating topic, and there are certain mysteries within evolution, and that's the stuff where people are writing PhDs about right now, trying to work it out, not just making a sweeping thing going, I don't know how it done works, so it's probably not. It's probably just one big mystery. And there's a big difference between something being a mystery or being mysterious to me and it actually being a real mystery. And I want my mysteries to be real. And one of the real mysteries that not even experts have got any proper understanding of is consciousness. consciousness. What is it? This is a fascinating topic. What is it? Where does it come from? Where does it reside when we're sleeping? Consciousness is a mystery which can be explored through inner exploration. It can be explored in many different things, it's examined in research labs around the world by scientists and psychiatrists and psychologists and cognitive scientists. But anyone that has been learning meditation, you can quite quickly start to have certain insights of your own. And a few ideas about that and my own explorations of meditation we will delve into next time. And there we go. We come to the end of another leg. I felt perhaps I was a little rambling today, but certain times and certain days there's a lot going on in my life at the moment, so certain times we get a little looser around when we're out doing our little explorations. But I if you want to have a chat to me, or you want to work with me on something, then contact me on thewayoftheshaman@gmail.com, or you can find me at captainfrodo.com, or you can find me on social media as Captain Frodo, or actually just and you can find me at Frodo Santini on Facebook and that. And anyway, if you are enjoying these episodes that are here, it would be very excellent if you could tell your friends. I can tell people, and I can put out ads, and I can pay for these things, which I do, to try and get more people to join us in these explorations. But nothing works, and nothing is more important than you. If you do find any value in this at all, it would be excellent if you contacted just one friend is enough. If you have 2 friends that you think might be very interested, that's also okay. But take some time out of your busy schedule, and when you see someone, bring up the project that we have here, that we exist, that this little community of people that gather bi-weekly, and that it's a good and valuable thing. If you do that, I would be very, very grateful and very happy. Thanks a lot. That's all I have to say for today. And then all that's left to be said is take care of yourself and those you love. And I hope to see you along the way.